Karen Whitmore's coffee mug shattered against her kitchen floor as she spotted the construction truck backing into the driveway across the street. At 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, the violation was so egregious that her hands literally trembled with righteous fury. Pool renovations were strictly prohibited before 8:00 a.m., according to Meadowbrook HOA Covenant 15.3b, and she had the laminated copy to prove it. She didn't bother with shoes. Barefoot and still in her leopard print robe, Karen stormed across the street like a woman possessed, her phone already recording as she approached the work crew. The truck's reverse beeper felt like a personal assault on her eardrums. "Excuse me." Her voice could have shattered windows. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" The crew foreman, a weathered man named Miguel, looked up from his clipboard with the weary expression of someone who dealt with this before. "Ma'am, we're just..." "Don't mind me. I'm Karen Whitmore, Vice President of the Meadowbrook HOA, and you are in dire ECT violation of our noise ordinances." She thrust her phone closer to his face. "This is going straight to my lawyer, ND the county inspector." What Karen didn't notice was her neighbor Janet emerging from behind the house, having returned early from her daughter's wedding weekend to surprise her husband with the pool renovation he'd wanted for 15 years. Janet's face went from confusion to fury in 3 seconds flat. "Karen, what the hell are you doing in my driveway?" Janet's voice carried the kind of cold authority that came from being a high school principal for 23 years. "I'm protecting this neighborhood from contractors who think rules don't apply to them." Karen spun around, her robe dramatically billowing. "These people started working at 6:45 a.m., which is a clear violation of..." "Of what?" Janet stepped closer, and Karen suddenly realized she might have miscalculated. "Karen, I hired these men. This is my property. And last I checked, pool renovations don't fall under HOA jurisdiction when they're contained entirely within private property lines." The color drained from Karen's face faster than water from a broken pool pump. In her 17 years of HOA enforcement, she'd never been wrong about a covenant violation. Her reputation depended on her encyclopedic knowledge of community rules. That's impossible," she stammered, pulling out her phone to check the regulations. Section 15.3b clearly states that any construction activities that might disturb the peace must comply with. Her voice trailed off as she realized she couldn't find the specific clause she'd been so certain about. Miguel cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we checked all the permits and regulations before we started. We're completely legal." The crew of 6 men watched in fascination as Karen's face cycled through several shades of red. This was better than reality TV. Karen spent the next 3 days conducting what she privately called Operation Pool Watch. Armed with a notebook, timestamp camera, and a folding chair positioned strategically in her front yard, she documented every aspect of the Henderson renovation project. Vehicle arrival times, noise level estimates, dust particle observations, and worker behavior patterns filled pages of meticulously organized data. She discovered that Miguel's crew actually followed every regulation perfectly. They arrived at exactly 7:30 a.m., took their required breaks, and finished by 4:00 p.m. They used proper dust containment measures, kept their equipment organized, and even cleaned up debris that had blown into the street. This was worse than being wrong about the regulations. This was being wrong about everything. But Karen Whitmore didn't become vice president of the Meadowbrook HOA by giving up easily. If she couldn't find existing violations, she'd create new standards. The neighborhood needed protection from the precedent this renovation was setting. On Thursday evening, she called an emergency HOA board meeting. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began, addressing the 5 other board members gathered in the community center's conference room. Gladys sat at the head of the table, looking slightly annoyed at being pulled away from her book club. "As you know, we're facing an unprecedented situation with the Henderson pool renovation. While technically legal, it's exposing gaps in our current covenant structure that could lead to neighborhood-wide chaos if not addressed immediately." Board member Tom Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Karen, isn't their renovation going smoothly? I drove by yesterday and it looked completely professional. That's exactly the problem, Karen said, clicking to her first PowerPoint slide. The appearance of professionalism is masking the deeper issues. We need to consider the precedent this sets for future renovations. She launched into a 20-minute presentation, complete with noise charts, traffic pattern analysis, and property value projections. Her research was thorough, her graphs were color-coded, and her conclusions were completely fabricated. Therefore, she concluded, I propose we implement an emergency moratorium on all major renovations, pending a comprehensive review of our community standards. The room fell silent. Gladys drummed her fingers on the table. Never a good sign. Karen, Gladys said slowly, are you suggesting we hold legitimate home improvements because you're uncomfortable with one neighbor's pool renovation? I'm suggesting we protect our community's character and property values, Karen replied, but she could hear the defensive edge creeping into her voice. Board member Sarah Chen, a retired attorney, leaned forward. This sounds dangerously close to harassment, Karen. We could face serious legal challenges if we try to stop lawful renovations without legitimate cause. The Henderson renovation is the legitimate cause. Karen's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. We need to act before. Before what? Gladys interrupted. Before our neighbors improve their properties? Before people exercise their legal rights? The meeting ended with a unanimous vote against the moratorium. As the other board members filed out, offering awkward goodbyes, Gladys lingered. Karen, I think you need to step back from this situation. You're letting it consume you. I'm protecting our neighborhood, Karen insisted. No, Gladys said quietly. You're embarrassing our HOA. And if this continues, I'll have to consider whether you're fit to remain vice president. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Karen's mood perfectly. She'd barely slept, replaying Gladys's threat over and over. Use the vice presidency? Impossible. She'd given 6 years of her life to this HOA, attending every meeting, mediating every dispute, enforcing every rule with unwavering dedication. The sound of machinery starting up across the street felt like a personal attack. Karen dressed in her most authoritative outfit, navy blazer, pressed white shirt, official HOA name badge, and marched across the street with the grim determination of a general approaching battle. Today would be different. Today she'd make them understand. The pool renovation was nearly complete. What had been a torn-up disaster zone 3 days ago now resembled something from a home improvement magazine. The new deck was partially installed, the pool liner gleamed like sapphire, and landscaping materials were neatly staged for the final phase. Karen found Miguel supervising the installation of AED pool lights, his crew working with the quiet efficiency of professionals who took pride in their craft. I need to speak with you, she announced. Miguel looked up, his expression carefully neutral. Ma'am, if this is about the work schedule, we're following all the regulations exactly. This isn't about regulations anymore. This is about respect. Karen's voice carried the weight of her accumulated frustration. Do you understand what this neighborhood means to the people who live here? Do you care about the community you're destructing? Lady, we're installing pool lights, not building a nuclear reactor, called out one of the younger crew members. A few others chuckled. The laughter was the spark that lit Karen's fuse. Don't bend to you, dare loathe to me, she screamed, her professional facade cracking completely. I have lived in this neighborhood for 17 years. I have given everything to protect its character and values. You people roll in here for a few days and act like our standards mean nothing. The work site went dead silent. Miguel stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property. You're creating a hostile work environment. Hostile? Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. I'll show you hostile. Do you know who I am? I'm Karen Whitmore, Vice President of the Meadowbrook HOA, and I will not stand here and be dismissed by some. She caught herself before the words she was thinking escaped, but the pause hung in the air like a confession. Miguel's expression hardened. Somewhat, ma'am? From behind her came Janet's voice, cold as winter. Some honest working man doing the job I hired him to do. Karen spun around to find Janet standing on her back porch, phone in hand, clearly recording. Behind Janet stood 3 other neighbors, drawn by the commotion. Their faces ranged from shock to disgusted. "Janet, you were just embarrassing yourself and everyone who has to live near you." Janet cut her off. "I've been patient, Karen. I've tried to be understanding. But this ends now. McGill, please continue with your work. And Karen." She stepped closer, her principal voice in full effect. "If you set foot on my property again without permission, I'm calling the police." Karen looked around at the faces surrounding her, the crew members shaking their heads, the neighbors whispering among themselves. Janet's expression of absolute disgust. For the first time in her adult life, Karen Whitmore was completely, utterly powerless. She stumbled back across the street, her professional composure in ruins, aware that someone's phone was still recording her retreat. By evening, she knew, half the neighborhood would have seen the video. As she reached her front door, her own phone buzzed with a text from Gladys. "Emergency board meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. We need to discuss your future with the HOA." Karen sank onto her front steps, still in her authoritative blazer, and wondered how protecting her neighborhood had somehow made her its biggest threat. Across the street, the sound of construction continued, steady, professional, and completely indifferent to her presence. But as she sat there in the gathering dusk, a new thought began to form. Maybe the pool renovation wasn't the real problem. Maybe the real problem was that after 17 years of being the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian, Karen had forgotten how to be its neighbor. The question was it too late to remember? 20 minutes later, Karen sat in her home office, surrounded by 3 binders of HOA documents and a growing stack of printed internet articles about noise ordinances. Her husband Derek had left for work after stepping over the coffee mug shards with the resigned sigh of a man who'd learned not to engage during his wife's projects. She could not be wrong about this. She could not be wrong about this. Her landline rang, the special red phone reserved for HOA emergency calls. Meadowbrook HOA Emergency Hotline, Karen speaking. "Karen, it's Gladys from Maple Street. There's a situation brewing with the Henderson's pool renovation. Apparently, someone made quite a scene this morning. And now Janet's talking about filing a harassment complaint with the county." Karen's grip tightened on the receiver. Gladys Pemberton was the HOA president and the only person in the neighborhood whose approval Karen desperately craved. If Gladys had heard about the morning's incident, damage control was essential. "I was simply ensuring that proper procedures were followed," Karen said carefully. "You know how important it is to maintain our community standards." "Oh, I agree completely," Gladys replied, and Karen felt her shoulders relax. "Which is why I need you to handle this delicately. We can't afford any bad publicity right now, not with the annual HOA elections coming up in 2 months. Elections. Karen had been planning to run for president when Gladys's term expired. This pool renovation fiasco could derail everything. "Of course, I'll handle it professionally." Karen was already formulating a plan. "In fact, I'll go over there right now and smooth things over with Janet." "Good, and Karen, perhaps bring some of those cookies you made for the last board meeting. Sugar works better than vinegar." Karen hung up and immediately began stress-baking chocolate chip cookies. While they cooled, she practiced her apology speech in the mirror, adjusting her expression to convey sincere regret while maintaining her authority. She changed into her best approachable neighbor outfit, khaki slacks, and a soft blue cardigan that made her look trustworthy. Armed with still warm cookies and renewed confidence, Karen knocked on Janet's front door at exactly 2:30 p.m. The construction noise had resumed after lunch break, and she could see Miguel directing his crew around the half-excavated pool area. Janet answered the door with a look that could freeze lava. "Karen." "Janet, I brought you some cookies as an apology for this morning's misunderstanding." Karen held out the plate with her most winning smile. "I realize I may have been a bit overzealous in my enforcement duties." Janet didn't take the cookies. "A bit overzealous? You ambushed my work crew at dawn, accused them of violating laws that don't exist, and threatened to call your lawyer. My contractor is now questioning whether he wants to continue working in this neighborhood. I'm sure we can clear this all up," Karen insisted, pushing the cookies forward again. Perhaps we could discuss some reasonable accommodations. Maybe the crew could start at 8 o'clock a.m. instead of 6:45. It would be better for everyone's peace of mind. Janet's eyes narrowed. Karen, they started at 7:30 a.m., which is perfectly legal. And I'm not accommodating anything. This is my property, my renovation, and my business. The rejection stung worse than Karen had expected. She'd never had a peace offering refused so bluntly.